The story begins in the heat of a fierce battle. A group of high-ranking adventurers fights a massive dragon. Baiza, an A-rank shaman from the Golden Age Guild, shouts loudly for support. Nearby, Rodishu, an A-rank mage, uses his magic to shoot intense fire at the beast to keep the pressure on it. Kyunin, the team leader and an S-rank magic swordsman, commands the squad with authority. He orders Saki, an S-rank swordsman from the Blade of Salvation, to find a weak spot and end the fight. In the backlands, a young man named Yuki tries to stay safe. He keeps his head down. Yuki is an F-rank individual with no class, and he serves only as the luggage carrier for the group. Saki sees a chance to strike. She activates her special skill, Luminous Slash. She swings her sword with great power and cuts right through the dragon. The beast falls easily, defeated by her single blow. Yuki narrates the state of the world. He explains that dungeons appeared decades ago, yet humanity still struggles to conquer them all. Abandoned dungeons often suffer from outbreaks, which cause terrible disasters for modern society. Yuki feels sad because most adventurers only hunt for money instead of trying to clear these threats. Only a few true heroes, like the party he is with right now, actually push the front lines to save people. After the battle ends, the mood becomes unpleasant. Rodishu demands recovery potions and begins to mock Yuki. He calls Yuki a luggage boy and insults him. Rodishu complains that Yuki risks nothing while the rest of them put their lives on the line. He expresses his frustration about working with a scrub who has barely any mana. Kyunin interrupts the bullying. He reminds everyone that this is an S-rank dungeon and not a place for idle gossip. He speaks coldly to Yuki and tells him that if he is part of the party, he needs to do his job properly. Yuki apologizes immediately. He admits that he got distracted because he was watching the amazing power of top-tier adventurers. He says it was a great learning experience for someone classless like him. Despite the large gap in their levels, Yuki vows internally that one day he will become a real adventurer. Yuki finds his motivation in a tragedy from 2 years ago. A dungeon outbreak destroyed his home district and the orphanage where he and Saki grew up. The disaster took everything from them. Yuki is determined to prevent another tragedy like that, no matter the cost. Deep inside the dungeon, the party finally finds the last piece they were looking for. Suddenly, a trap activates beneath their feet. Magic surrounds them, and they teleport to a new area. A terrifying presence approaches them. They identify it as a demon lord, the ultimate disaster found only in S-rank dungeons. The demon lord scoffs at the humans. Rodishu attacks quickly with his ice javelin triple spell, and Saki follows up with another luminous slash. However, the demon lord blocks their attacks without any effort. He scolds them for having no manners and calls them ignorant. The party realizes they are completely outmatched and will likely die. Seeing no other choice, Yuki makes a desperate move. He initiates a special item called the return sequence. The item begins a countdown. Yuki yells at the demon lord to get his attention. He claims that he is the opponent. Baiza screams at Yuki and calls him an idiot because stepping forward puts Yuki outside the item's safety radius. Kyunin realizes that Yuki plans to sacrifice himself so the others can escape. The timer hits 0, and the party teleports away to safety. Yuki remains behind, alone with the monster. Yuki declares that he will take the demon lord down with him. He rushes forward to attack, but his strike is useless against the powerful entity. The demon lord looks intrigued. He notes that Yuki threw away his life to save his kind. He calls this madness magnificent. Instead of killing Yuki, the demon lord offers a deal. He wants Yuki to join him in conquering other dungeons. Yuki feels confused and asks why monsters would want to clear dungeons. The demon lord explains his situation. He says that monsters are constantly raided by humans and cannot leave the dungeon. To survive, they must kill other dungeon bosses to steal their mana and strengthen their own dungeon. He wants to stop the tragedy of his subordinates dying. Yuki understands this sentiment perfectly. The demon lord asks Yuki to help drive humans away without killing them. He hopes that if the dungeon becomes too strong, humans will stop attacking. He warns that if Yuki refuses, he will die along with countless other humans. Yuki realizes that leaving the monsters alone will only lead to more sacrifices, so he agrees to the deal. However, Yuki clarifies his position. He states that he is doing this for humanity, not for the monsters. The demon lord is pleased and accepts him as a collaborator. Yuki questions if a classless person is really useful. The demon lord reveals a shocking truth. He explains that because Yuki is classless, he can choose the monster tamer path. Yuki smirks confidently. He vows inside his mind that he will not be used by them. Instead, he plans to be the one using the monsters. The demon lord feels amused by this outburst. He decides that since Yuki is incompetent on his own, he will make good use of him. He explains the mechanics of their partnership. For the demon lord to enter other dungeons, he must be summoned by a collaborator who holds the Monster Tamer class. Since Yuki has an empty class slot, he is the perfect vessel for this task. However, there are conditions. To become a Monster Tamer, a contract is mandatory. This contract is achieved by either defeating the monster or bonding with it. The demon lord states there are 3 ways to form this contract, and he chooses to do it by force. Without warning, he violently squeezes Yuki's head. Yuki screams in pain as the magic takes hold of him. The demon lord reveals that he can now see clearly through Yuki's eyes. Yuki realizes this is not just a bond. It is a surveillance tactic to ensure he does not betray the demon lord. With the preparations complete, the demon lord sends Yuki back to the surface. He instructs Yuki to dive into any dungeon he likes. When the time is right, Yuki must call for him, and everything will be resolved. Yuki feels confused and wonders when exactly that time is supposed to be. The next day, Yuki stands at the guild reception desk. The receptionist asks if he plans to attempt a dungeon conquest alone. She explains that strict regulations are in place because many low-rank adventurers hunt solely for money rather than clearing the dungeon. This greed leads to neglected dungeons and more dangerous outbreaks. Because solo adventurers cannot have their contributions verified, the guild usually forbids them from entering. She assumes Yuki is just another desperate person looking for a quick payout to solve money troubles. Yuki corrects her immediately. He explains that he wants to enter the F-rank Labyrinth of Silence to level up. Since that specific dungeon has very few monsters and is considered a beginner zone, she agrees to guide him. Yuki enters the dungeon and notes that the security seems lax. Suddenly, the demon lord's voice speaks directly inside his head. Yuki feels shocked, but the demon lord explains that communicating with monsters is the bread and butter of a monster tamer. The demon lord lectures Yuki on the nature of an abandoned dungeon. These are places humans have left to rot because they lack valuable resources. Without human intervention, monsters breed in peace until the population explodes, which causes the dungeon to collapse. Yuki looks around the empty corridors and points out that there are actually no monsters at all. The demon lord finds this boring. Suddenly, the ground begins to shake violently. It is a dungeon stampede. A massive giant slime appears and blocks the path. The demon lord analyzes the situation and realizes the truth. Because the food supply was low, the monsters cannibalized each other. They merged into one gigantic creature. 2 people, including the receptionist, are fleeing, but are directly in the monster's path. Yuki frantically asks the demon lord if summoning him now would save the girl. The demon lord warns him that the aftershock of the summon is so powerful it would blow the girl away along with the slime. Yuki realizes he cannot summon Bear from a distance safely. He shouts that he has no choice and sprints toward the danger. The demon lord watches through Yuki's eyes and feels impressed. He notes that Yuki is the kind of man who saves those who must be saved, even if it means getting hurt himself. Yuki rushes in and shouts the true name, Bear, the demon lord. He declares that the time is right and activates the summon. Bear manifests into reality. He addresses Yuki as master and tells him to use his power. Yuki screams the name Bear. Immediately, severe pain racks his body. It feels like he burns from the inside out. He begs his body to hold together and not break under the strain. Despite the huge amount of power that pours out, only a single, colossal finger appears from the sky. Bear remarks that just one finger is enough to handle enemies of this level. He unleashes a skill called Chaotic Dawn. The resulting destruction is not just an attack, but a total disaster. The force obliterates the giant slime completely. The receptionist and the other girl rush over to Yuki, who collapses on the ground. He is seriously injured and cannot stand up on his own. A few days later, Yuki wakes up in a hospital bed. He feels surprised to realize that his first rank up occurred while he was asleep. He feels guilty because he scared the 2 women who had to drag him to safety. Suddenly, Bear appears in the room. He asks why Yuki looks so gloomy when this event should be a celebration. Bear praises Yuki for his actions in the dungeon. He notes that instead of throwing his life away in a suicidal attack, Yuki hesitated at nothing to grasp a different option by summoning him. Bear says he likes that strength and officially acknowledges Yuki as his master. Yuki accepts the title with gratitude. However, Liebherr warns him that summoning him nearly kills Yuki every time due to the massive mana drain. He suggests that Yuki call a different servant for now. A woman appears and introduces herself as Elvina, an undead maid. She jokes that although she is charming, falling in love with her is troublesome because she has no pulse. She claims to be stronger than Yuki, but aims to be an approachable maid. Liebherr tells Yuki that he must raise his level until he can withstand a full summon. Later, Yuki enters an E-rank dungeon called the Nest of Burning Ones to train. Elvina destroys the monsters effortlessly and announces that the threat elimination is complete. She acts somewhat childishly and seeks praise for her work. This behavior reminds Yuki of a kid from his orphanage. As they progress through the dungeon, Yuki complains that the level-up notifications have not stopped for a while. Elvina explains why she is better suited for Yuki right now. She states that Liebherr is too special and requires an immense amount of magic power to summon. This is why the previous summon was cancelled midway and only produced a finger. In contrast, Elvina describes herself as a bargain maid with excellent fuel efficiency. This allows Yuki to keep her summoned for a long time without danger. They arrive at a heavy door that marks the boss room. Elvina cheerfully tells Yuki to just knock and enter. Inside, the room is filled with strange flames. A voice welcomes them and asks them to become sacrifices. Elvina praises Yuki because he notices that the flames are different from others in the dungeon. These are holy attribute flames, which are the natural enemy of the undead. Yuki notes that the light resembles the power Saki uses. The enemy attacks with a skill called Fire Circle Sanctuary. Yuki realizes this monster is a dungeon boss, similar to Liebherr, and it will not let them escape easily. Yuki considers summoning Liebherr to finish the fight. However, Elvina reminds him that with his current power, he can only maintain her. She asks if he intends to fight in front of a monster while she watches. Yuki replies that they are comrades, so they will fight together. Moved by his words, Elvina agrees. Yuki prepares to battle and feels determined to show the results of his leveling. The price of power the battle against the mysterious armored boss continues with high intensity. Yuki frantically searches his status screen and realizes he acquired a new skill earlier when he leveled up. He activates the skill called True Demon Eye. Instantly, a flood of information fills his vision. He sees that the enemy is a dungeon boss with both fire and holy attributes. More alarmingly, the boss possesses a skill called Holy Flame. This skill exerts an absolute effect against dark attributes, which makes it a lethal counter to Elvina. Yuki quickly shifts his gaze to Elvina to check her status. He sees her race is listed as Undead Maid, and she has a skill called Maid of All Work. The description states it increases all parameters for a set time, but Yuki notices a worrying detail. The usage limit is set to 1. Before he can analyze it further, the word danger flashes repeatedly across his vision. The boss launches an attack, and Yuki screams for Elvina to dodge immediately. Yuki explains to himself that the True Demon Eye reveals the attributes, skills, and danger levels of monsters. It is a basic skill for a monster tamer that allows him to see the truth of all monsters. Armed with this critical information, Yuki feels confident that they can transition to the offensive with peace of mind. Elvina lands a solid hit on the boss, but Yuki looks at his interface and sees that the damage is 0. He realizes something is wrong because his attacks do not get through. He uses his demon eye to look past the armor and sees the truth. The enemy is actually a flame monster. It is a small, shapeless creature moving inside the large suit of armor to evade attacks. Simply kicking the armor does not work because the monster is not where the impact lands. Yuki focuses and sees the information text moving slightly, which betrays the true position of the monster. With the strategy decided, Elvina asks Yuki not to be captivated by her charm just this once. Yuki begins to shout precise instructions and acts as her navigator. He yells at her to get down and pull back to the right to help her avoid incoming attacks. Then he directs her offense. He calls out the monster's location inside the armor, pointing to the left arm, the right shoulder, and the head. For the first time, the boss shows a significant reaction to the damage. Yuki urges Elvina to push a little more, but the boss counters. Elvina is struck by the attack and groans in pain. She realizes she cannot win like this and asks Yuki to use her skill. Yuki hesitates as he looks at the skill Made of All Work and its single usage limit. Yuki remembers that a monster tamer can force a contracted monster to activate a skill. Elvina explains that the skill will increase her stats and allow them to strike before the enemy evades. However, she reminds him it can only be used once. Yuki realizes she is trusting him to determine the perfect timing. He agrees and declares they will settle this with the next attack. The screen fills with red danger warnings that almost obscure Yuki's vision. The chaos feels overwhelming, but Yuki refuses to stop. He screams orders and tells her to jump left and slide to the left to weave through the enemy's barrage. At the critical moment, he activates the skill made of all work. The attack connects successfully, and the boss is defeated. Elvina stands amidst the dust and pants heavily. She remarks that using the skill makes her very tired. She tells Yuki she will take her leave first and bids him farewell. Before Yuki can stop her, she vanishes. He tries to call out to her, but there is no response to the summons. Suddenly, the environment shifts around him. Yuki finds himself back in the deepest level of Bear's dungeon. Bear, the demon lord, greets him and looks relieved that Yuki is safe. Yuki immediately asks where Elvina is because he wants to scold her for leaving him behind. Bear solemnly leads him to a small mound of earth with a sword stuck in it. He explains that this is how they mourn the deceased. Yuki feels confused and asks why they are talking about the deceased. Bear explains the harsh reality of the undead race. Their skills exert powerful effects, but the price is the destruction of their own body. He pulls up the status screen again to show Yuki. The usage limit of 1 was not a cooldown time. It represented her life. Yuki is horrified. He realizes that when she increased her stats for that moment, she paid with her existence. He screams that he never ordered her to do that. Bear silences him and states that saving the dungeon from humans had that much value to her. She merely did the best work possible for that end. Bear tries to take the responsibility as the king, but Yuki interrupts. Yuki blames himself. He says he was the one who should have thought it through instead of blindly following her suggestion. He blames his own weakness for not being able to fight. Bear vows to make Yuki strong until he is able to summon him fully. Desperate, Yuki asks if there is a monster tamer skill that can resurrect Elvina. Bear coldly replies that there is none. He states that monster tamers only use and consume monsters. They do not repair them. Just then, a voice calls out and chides Bear for being mean. A woman in a maid outfit appears and asks why Yuki was not included in the discussion about Elvina's fate. Yuki immediately uses his true demon eye on her. Her stats appear in his vision. She is May, the head maid. Her attributes are holy and demon. Most shockingly, her skill is underworld approval, which allows for resurrection from a corpse. The danger levels surrounding her are intense and fill the screen with glitching text. May smiles at Yuki and asks a tantalizing question. She asks if he wants to know the method to resurrect Elvina. Yuki stares in disbelief at the revelation before him. Elvina, whom he thought was gone forever, can be brought back to life. May, the head maid who just appeared, notices that Yuki is using his true demon eye to read her status. The skill displayed is Hades' consent, which allows for resurrection from a corpse. But Yuki notices a crucial detail. There is a note that says conditions apply. He tells them he can only see the effect and the fact that there are strict conditions. Bear orders May to explain the situation to the group. May reintroduces herself as the head maid, responsible for taking care of everyone in the dungeon and handling resurrections. She describes herself as an insurance policy for emergencies, ensuring the dungeon never has to end even if humans kill them. However, the conditions for this miracle are steep. May explains condition number 1. The skill consumes a massive amount of magical power. It is an ultra-inefficient skill. She gives a terrifying example. To resurrect a single human, she would need enough mana to construct an entire dungeon floor. May continues, explaining that if she were to resurrect Elvina, the dungeon would get significantly smaller because the mana would be drained to pay the cost. A smaller dungeon is easier for humans to conquer, which puts everyone else at risk. This is why another monster, named Cyan-chan, opposes the resurrection, arguing that saving one life would result in losing even more lives in the long run. Yuki desperately tries to find a loophole. He suggests they could slowly save up unused mana over time until they have enough. May shoots down this idea immediately due to condition number 2. You cannot resurrect someone unless they still have some of their own mana left. Elvina's residual mana is fading and will disappear completely in 10 days at most. The reality sets in. They have a 10-day time limit to secure a massive amount of mana. May states they must procure this mana from elsewhere. Yuki realizes the implication. They must invade and conquer other dungeons. If they steal mana from outside sources, they can use the resurrection skill without weakening their own home. However, The small E or F rank dungeons Yuki has faced so far will not provide nearly enough power. Mei admits she previously suggested they conquer a really big dungeon to solve the problem, but everyone got angry at her. They considered it a pointless death to risk Yuki, the key to their plan, on such a dangerous mission. Despite the danger, Yuki steps forward. He asks a man named Vinto to let him do it. Vinto, a stern-looking man, calls the idea reckless. He warns that Yuki and any new monsters will just end up dying like Elvina. Yuki admits he has no strategy and is currently too weak, but he insists that if there is a way to save her, he cannot choose anything else. He reminds Li Bear that this determination is exactly why they formed a contract. Li Bear accepts Yuki's resolve. He decides that if Yuki is to go, he must be trained. Li Bear orders Vinto to be the one to train him. Yuki looks at Vinto and recognizes him. He realizes that Vinto was the one who was fighting Saki previously. Li Bear gives them 7 days to prepare. Vinto agrees to the order and tells Yuki to follow him. As they leave, Mei whispers a chilling warning to Li Bear. She notes that Vinto was the one most opposed to using a human. She fears that, knowing his personality, Vinto might actually kill Yuki during the training. Yuki follows Vinto deep into the dungeon and feels amazed by the environment. Vinto explains that Li Bear has granted his executives entire floors to use freely. He tells Yuki it is an honor for a human to see this. Yuki asks Vinto if the training involves helping him level up. Vinto stops and explains the truth about leveling. For humans, leveling up is the act of shaving off mana from monsters and the dungeon and mixing it into themselves. This process damages the dungeon. However, since Yuki has entered a contract with Li Bear, he is now a being who shares the mana of Li Bear's dungeon. Because of this connection, Yuki cannot level up in the traditional way. This is the true reason Li Bear is sending him to other dungeons. He must steal mana from outside to grow. Confused about how he will get stronger without levels, Yuki asks for clarification. In response, Vinto tosses him a sword. Vinto declares that Yuki lacks everything: foundation, strength, knowledge, and talent. Without warning, Vinto launches a lethal attack. Yuki barely reacts, as Vinto tells him to start building the strength he lacks if he wants to take Elvina back. Vinto attacks again with blinding speed. Yuki realizes that if he stops to think even for a second, he will not make it. Vinto taunts him and says it is a tragedy that Elvina's fate is left to someone so weak. Yuki realizes Vinto is fighting with the intent to kill. But instead of cowering, Yuki's eyes burn with determination. He shouts that he will not die. He declares he will be the one to cut Vinto loose for the sake of the dungeon and Li Bear. He refuses to accept Vinto's belief that his death would not matter. Vinto sets the condition for the training. Yuki must survive for 3 hours. He states that the best way to master the sword is to cross the line between life and death. Yuki blocks a heavy strike, his sword shaking violently. He screams that he will live through this, even if it kills him. The intense training session between Yuki and the executive, Vinto, rages on without a break. Sparks fly as steel clashes against steel. Vinto attacks with a blinding flash of speed, but Yuki manages to react just in time. As they separate, Vinto acknowledges Yuki's progress. He notes that Yuki's movements have improved compared to when they started. Vinto realizes that Yuki is not just looking at him blindly. Through his true demon eye, Yuki actually sees the path of a sword and calculates the most efficient way to block it. Vinto understands that Yuki's ability is not limited to just reading static stats. Instead, he can understand how a body moves in real time. Yuki activates his skill, the true demon eye, to analyze his opponent further. The interface reveals Vinto's data. His affinity is water, and his primary skill is the Bloodflower Blade. However, knowing this information does not make the fight any easier. Yuki realizes that every single strike from Vinto is a potential fatal blow. The level difference between them is so vast that Yuki struggles to even see through the attacks. Desperate to survive, Yuki tries to position himself where the red alert warnings do not block his vision. Vinto notices Yuki's hesitation and defensive posture. He taunts him and asks if that eye is the only skill Yuki is capable of using. Vinto launches another attack, a single flash that forces Yuki back. Yuki manages to dodge, but Vinto looks unimpressed. He ruthlessly critiques Yuki's performance and states that his movements are full of waste. Vinto effortlessly blocks Yuki's counterattacks, which leaves Yuki no time to buy himself a moment of rest. Vinto points out a fatal flaw. He says Yuki's judgment is too slow. He explains that Yuki only thinks about his next move after he has already been blocked. Vinto coldly remarks that fighting like that is the same as asking to be killed. Yuki curses his weakness as Vinto pushes him back again. He realizes that even if he forces an offensive, the result is the same. The gap between them is insurmountable. Vinto's physique is different, his swordsmanship is superior, and his experience is on another level. Yuki feels his body breaking down, and the alert warnings in his vision increase rapidly. But the most terrifying realization hits Yuki when he analyzes the last exchange. Vinto was not even using mana. He was dominating Yuki with just swordsmanship. The power gap is truly out of this world. Despite the hopelessness, Yuki refuses to break. He vows to catch up no matter what. Vinto wonders if this spirit is genuine strength or just reckless bravado, so he decides to test it. Suddenly, Yuki's vision becomes completely filled with the word alert. There are so many warnings that he cannot see anything else. He realizes that if he continues to rely on these warnings, he will die. He decides he does not need information that tells him he is deserving of death. Instead, he needs information on the skill itself to save his life. He shifts the focus of his demon eye. He ignores the danger warnings and locks onto the enemy's technique. The skill description for Bloodflower Blade appears. It explains that the skill transforms blood into blades and unleashes repeated slashes on the target. Yuki screams the name of the skill and attempts to replicate it in the heat of the moment. He lashes out, and Vinto lets out a surprised grunt as he blocks the sudden strike. Later, Yuki wakes up on the floor. Vinto stands over him and asks if he has finally awakened. Yuki feels confused because he remembers that he took a fatal hit back then. He checks his body and asks about his wounds. Vinto explains that may heal them. Since Vinto stopped just before Yuki actually died, it did not cost much mana to fix him. Vinto admits that the attack Yuki used was just an imitation. However, he is impressed that Yuki attempted to steal his technique at such a critical moment. Because of that audacity, Vinto has become interested in seeing what comes next. Vinto declares that they will now begin full-scale training. Yuki looks nervous as Vinto opens a large door. Inside, a massive horde of armed skeletons and soldiers awaits. Vinto tells Yuki that although the numbers are a bit large, he expects Yuki to handle it lightly. Yuki laughs dryly as he stares at the army of enemies. He remarks that he never thought he would get used to this feeling of being constantly deserving of death. He readies his weapon and accepts his hellish training.